listeners, it's Jana. Welcome back to Grief Out Loud. Way back in 2020, I distinctly remember a coworker asking me, "Hey, have you heard of this new graphic memoir, Dancing at the Pity Party? It's the absolute best thing I've read about having a parent die when you're a young adult." I hadn't yet, but soon after that, the book seemed to be everywhere in Griefland. Back then, I never imagined I'd have the opportunity to talk with the author, Tyler Fetter. But 5 years later, here we are. Tyler's mom, Rhonda, was diagnosed with cancer the summer after Tyler's freshman year at college. Less than a year later, when Tyler was a sophomore and just 19, her mom died. About a decade later, she published Dancing at the Pity Party, which chronicled her mother's illness and all the heartbreaking, awkward, and uncomfortable moments that happened in the wake of her death. For years, Tyler described herself as a dead mom person, someone whose identity was deeply interwoven with the loss of her mom. But this past winter, when her father died, also of cancer, Tyler found herself navigating the world with a new aspect of her identity, being an adult orphan. In our conversation, Tyler talks about what's different, but also the same, about grieving for a parent when you're basically still a teenager versus when you're mostly a fully formed adult. We also get into how art and community helps to keep her going in her grief, and why even the smallest tangible keepsakes can feel so essential. Tyler also confirms that in grief, there's almost always space for both tears and laughter. Okay, here's our conversation. Tyler, thanks for coming on the show. I really appreciate you making time for this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me.
It recently hit me that I start almost every interview with, "Tell us about your person," or "What do you want us to know about your person?" And that's like such a hard question to answer. I don't know why it's taken me 10 years to figure that out. It's like, how do you distill someone's life down to like 2 sentences? But I'm still going to ask you that question, of course. So what would you like to share with us about your parents?
I think it's such a fun question. I feel like I could talk about this kind of thing all the time. I had a therapist years ago where I was describing my parents to her just throughout the course of many therapy sessions. And one day she was like, "Oh, so your dad's a dog and your mom's a cat." And I was like, "Yeah, that's that's right." So my mom was like quiet and mysterious and private, and my dad was really gregarious and charismatic. And I'm much more like my mom in that regard. So it was always fun to introduce my dad to people because he's so different from me. Both of my parents were really creative and very funny. My mom was like the handy one. She did all the building furniture and stuff. And my dad was really emotional, which I always thought was cool. I'd be like in the car with my mom and she'd get a call from him just to like check in, and he'd be crying. And she'd say, "What's wrong?" And he's like, "I'm watching To Kill a Mockingbird and it's hitting me." There's a whole chapter in my book that's just describing my mom. So I'll have to do something like my dad, like that for my dad sometime.
So your mom's a cat, your dad's a dog.
Mm-hmm.
And it's very clear, listeners, you can't see because you're listening, but there's a big cat tree in the back behind Tyler. So are you a cat parent or a dog parent?
I am a cat parent. I've been obsessed with cats since I was a little kid. As I've gotten older, I've realized that I love dogs too. I don't know that I would ever have my own because it requires leaving the house multiple times to walk them. And I don't always have the capacity for that. Um, but yeah, my cat might walk into the room at some point while we're talking. Right now, I think he's taking a nap.
Well, it's interesting that you were just a young adult when your mom died, and that to have had, a cat or cats as part of your life continuously since your mom has died, as a way of describing her as a cat. I'm making assumptions, but this idea of your mom's cat energy continues to be a part of your life.
Yeah, that's very accurate. It's like they'll show affection when they want to, but not all the time. My dad was just like hugging and like very affectionate all the time, and my mom was more reserved. Um,
Mm.
she did not bite me the way that my cat does.
You already said a little of this in the initial, like in the question you just answered, but I'm curious, like, what other parts of yourself come from your parents?
Mhm. So like growing up, it was like I'm the one who's like my mom, and then my middle sister Cody's the one who's like my dad, and our youngest sister Spencer is kind of a mix. So like the majority of me is like my mom. We have the same coloring, and I'm like the quiet one, and she's the quiet one. She was super artsy, and so am I. So it was like all the really obvious stuff. That was what we had in common. And then my dad and I were really into comedy together. So like laughing together was a really big part of our relationship. We had not the same sense of humor, but there was some good overlap there. My hands look just like his, but they're like the girl version. I also walk the same way he does. So, like the sounds of my steps when I'm walking throughout the house, I guess I kind of shuffle my feet a little bit. So it sort of sounds like hearing him walk around the
Mm.
room. And he also is just like a big dreamer and really ambitious. I think I get that from him. We wouldn't go about things the same way, but like the having lofty goals for ourselves, I think that was something we had in common.
This might be a weird question, but I'm thinking about like describing your parents, and they seem very different from one another. Have you ever wondered or thought about what it would have been like if it was your dad who died when you were younger and your mom was the one sort of supporting you and your sisters through the grief, and how that would have played out?
Oh, totally. I mean, I think it's pretty natural to have those kinds of thoughts when you lose one parent. Um, and it's hard to know really how it would have gone. Like, my only examples I have of living with my mom are where it was just like a regular childhood and then this scary cancer part at the end. And I have like a way broader experience of being with my dad because he was there through all this stuff. So I don't really know. Sometimes it feels like it could have been easier potentially just because my mom and I were on such a similar wavelength all the time, and my dad and I were so different. So he would often have a harder time understanding how I was feeling. Like our communication was a little bit tougher than the way that my mom and I would talk. But my mom also is like more emotionally closed off. So I don't know if she would have really retreated into herself. I mean, it's like there's no good way of it happening. Like there's not a winning option.
Right.
But it worked out okay the way it went. I mean, the whole thing sucks, but we handled it pretty well as a family, I think.
So, not necessarily better or worse, just it likely would have been different.
Yeah, for sure.
So, with your father died just this last winter,
Mhm.
2025, and you had always had this identity of being a dead mom person from the
Yeah.
time you were 19 until most recently. And now there's this idea of being an adult orphan. And I don't even know what the good question is about that, but like what was true about Tyler as a dead mom person, and what's now true about Tyler as an adult orphan?
Yeah, it's interesting because my experience of losing my mom was so impacted by making this book about her. I mean, there were 10 years in between before I made the book, but like over the last several years, I mean, the book came out in April of 2020. I've had so much experience talking about grief and being with other people who are grieving. And like when she first died, there was none of that. So I had a lot more experience going into losing my dad. um, that I think has been very helpful. It didn't feel as isolating. But I think I still feel like a dead mom person. Like it, because it's like that was the thing that shaped my like early adulthood. It almost feels like adolescence, but my like adult adolescence. And it also shaped the way that things went when I lost my dad. And I also found that in working on the book and doing all this, like all these events and things about the book, I kept talking about how, like, there's no wrong way to grieve as long as you're not hurting yourself or hurting anyone else. Whatever you want to do is fine. And then when my dad died, and I reacted differently to how I reacted when my mom died for a number of reasons. I was so quick to judge myself for how I was grieving, and that was an unfortunate surprise. And I had to kind of try to get myself to like take my previous self's advice about all of that.
Yeah, there's a big difference between naming the clothes that are hanging in your closet and actually putting them on.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's hard to
Yeah,
remember, like, oh, wait, that shirt is, I got to put that shirt on. I don't get to talk about that shirt and give it to other people all the time.
totally. Yeah.
Would you be open to sharing a little bit about what did seem different for you in like the reaction to your mom's death versus your dad's death?
Sure. Yeah. So my mom got sick the summer after my first year of college, and I had been like a real mama's girl. I was like the kid who would get picked up early from sleepovers. Like I would get homesick really easily. And I was also like basically a child. So it just felt like my safe place was being yanked away from me. It felt so much more like a tragedy. My dad's death was awful. And I mean, like losing someone you love is always a tragedy, but my dad was in his mid 70s and we'd had a lot of time together to process my mom's death and even to process his death. Like when my mom was sick as a family, the whole time we kept acting as if she was going to get better, just like basically the whole time. So there was no point as a family where we kind of sat down and we were like, this is what the future is looking like. Like, how can we prepare for this? But with my dad, we were like, oh, so he's probably going to die within the next chunk of time. Like, how can we make this time really special? So I, we found this like list of like family interview questions. So I have a lot of voice memos of me asking him these questions. And my sisters and I and my dad together, we put together this like huge Google Doc of funny phrases and things he would say. We started it, I think, for his birthday when he was turning 73. So we wanted to think of 73 things that he said, and we ended up having hundreds. So it's just this like treasure that we have. And also just like being older truly makes such a big
Mm.
difference. I remember after my mom died, I would have people who were like friends' moms would say to me, my mom died recently, and so I know what you're going through, whatever. And I was like, no, you don't. I mean, I would never say that to them. I was like, oh yeah, I'm sorry. Um, but I would get so mad internally, and it just felt like that's not the same thing. And now having the experience of losing a parent when I'm 35 versus when I was 19, it's so different. It still is horrible. And I don't mean to say that people losing a parent at whatever age they are, it isn't like a horrible thing. But for me and my experience, just like having my own home, like I don't come to my apartment and it's like there's the room where my mom was sleeping, like that sense of absence isn't there. Or my dad wasn't like my primary caretaker in my 30s. I would see him pretty often, but that kind of like primal wound thing was more the case with losing my mom. With my dad,
Yeah.
it was really different.
It's like in a totally different developmental phase of life where you are a mostly fully formed adult now versus when you were like a forming adult.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel like I was just like a blob of clay that had not been molded at all. And now I'm like a sculpture with some chips.
A few dents and dings along the way.
Yeah, more than a few. Yeah.
It sounds as though like your experience of grief or your understanding of grief or your interactions with grief really sort of shifted when your book Dancing at the Pity Party came out in 2020 and you started engaging more with people around grief. Oh, what was grief like for you prior? Like from 19 up until when your book came out?
Yeah, it was a pretty isolating thing. I've always had a pretty hard time opening up to people. So when my mom got sick, um, I like sent all my friends a Facebook message telling them, like, just so you know, this is what's going on. And then when I got to school, I basically was trying to act like things were normal because it just felt too weird to get vulnerable with people. That attitude faded away gradually the older that I got, but for a long time, it was just like, this is this thing that's hard for me and my sisters. And I didn't like know a ton of people around my age who were in a similar position. And I wasn't even really seeking that out. I think it just didn't like occur to me to try to find a community like that. It was just like, this is this private thing. And that's so different from how it is now. I feel like I have like grief friends now. That's so cool. It's a really special kind of connection you can have with someone if you meet around this kind of topic.
Yeah, the people who get it on some level and you start so many steps closer to one another. Because
Yeah.
there's not that like, oh, when am I going to tell you that my parent died and how they died? Like we're already there. We're
Uh-huh.
starting on that
Yeah,
place.
we're jumping into the deep end. And it's much more comfortable for me there. I I'm like one of those people who likes having talks about trauma more than like small talk about the weather. I know that's not always what people prefer.
Well, you're in the right spot here on Grief Out Loud.
I'm glad.
Oh, what was it like to put your book together? I mean, it's so relatable. It's so normalizing for pretty much anybody who has, a person in their life who's dealing with an illness and then dies in those early days of grief. Like it's so relatable. And it's interesting that you created that not having had a lot of connections with people around grief. And yet the way you talk about yours is so accessible. But what was it like to go back in time and really like delve in such detail?
It was hard, unsurprisingly. I think the hardest part was the earlier stages where I was going from not having a draft to having like my story down. Once it was like the editing and the coloring and all that, I think I got pretty desensitized. But early on, I think I was almost treating it like investigative journalism. Like I had all these boxes of like letters that my mom sent me when I was at sleepover camp as a kid and like old photos. And I would be asking my family questions that they did not feel like talking about. I was like, "Do you remember what the doctor looked like who told us she was going to die? Like, I remember that he he was maybe Pakistani, but it was a really long time ago, and I was obviously not fully perceiving everything around me at the time. My family's like, I don't want to think about that or talk about that. Um, so it was like it was a real project early
Mm.
on, and I think partially because of the grief and partially just because of the ADHD. I would like work really hard for like an hour or two and then fling myself onto the couch, just like lay in one place for a few hours and then get back to what I was doing. But ultimately it was a really positive thing and it felt very good to like take the stuff that was in my head and get it out.
In that process of being a kind of an investigative journalist into your own past and your family's past, was there like an interaction or a memory of a time with your mom that came back to you that you hadn't had close access to?
Know that there was. I'm like one of those people where I think in difficult times I like super remember everything. And with both of my sisters, they're a little bit more the type where they don't remember stuff, like they kind of block things out. I'm sure that there were things that came up, but basically I remember just kind of dumping all the stuff that was like buzzing around my head all the time and like letting it out.
What do you think that is, Tyler? Because I'm like, yeah, me too. Like, if something terrible happens, I remember granular detail. Good things happen. I'm like, I
Yeah,
don't know.
yeah.
I don't remember anything about that. But like, what is that?
Yeah, I feel like I can remember like what the little waiting room smelled like at the hospital. I don't know. I think it's one of those things where different people just process stuff differently. I'm sure there's some scientific explanation that I don't have. But I mean, like when I'm stressing, even now, I think I'll like hyper focus on like the grain of the wood of the table that I'm sitting at or whatever. Maybe it's helpful to look at that stuff instead of thinking about the emotional part of it all.
To get caught on like a physical, tangible detail that you can
Mhm.
focus on.
Yeah,
Is there any like particular? I'm sorry, I'm asking you to go back like 5 years. So
that's
we'll see
that's okay.
about this. But I'm just thinking like when your book comes out,
Mhm.
you kind of go on tour, and I say tour in quotes because it was 2020. So I'm guessing you did a lot of virtual touring of your book. And inevitably, people have questions and they share from their own personal experiences. Is there an interaction or a conversation that stands out to you in this moment that came out of your book going public?
So my book came out in April, and I remember I did this Motherless Mother's Day event. So it was like a month later. I can't remember who organized it, but it was a Zoom call, and it felt like it was maybe like 50 people who had all lost their moms, and it was just like a space that I had never existed in before. I mean, I'd at that point I'd had like a handful of one-on-one conversations or smaller groups, but this was like the biggest community like that I'd been a part of in this kind of way. And I remember the moderator asked us if we could go around and say something that annoyed us about our moms. And it was so glorious. It was like everyone just lit up. I think that in this arena, we're all used to talking about like the really painful stuff or really memorializing our parents and this like putting them on a pedestal kind of way, which I still am inclined to do a lot of the time. But being able to be like, no, the person you lost was a person and they had flaws. We all have flaws. Like, what was something that got on your nerves? It was just so much fun. People were like
Mm.
laughing. And I think it was just like this great sense of community. And that's something that I think about a lot whenever I'm in a group with other motherless or parentless or whatever people who have dealt with some kind of loss. I think it's like a fun part of conversation that we don't get a chance to have that often.
What did you say about your mom?
I don't remember. It was probably the thing in the book about how she was obsessive about eyebrows. It truly drove me nuts. It was like it sounds small, but it was like a big part of our relationship
And it
where
wasn't just her eyebrows, right? She was obsessed with your
mine, I
eyebrows.
mean, she was obsessed with eyebrows in general, and she also was a huge perfectionist, and I am too, but I think she took it to an even higher level. And so she would tweeze my eyebrows, uh, like whether I wanted her to or not, basically. And I've had like several readers since the book came out email me and say, I tweezed my eyebrows and thought of your mom. And that is just, it's like whatever the opposite of rolling over in her grave, that's what my mom is doing. She's doing cartwheels in her grave.
I know I love the illustration in your book of her like chasing you around with the tweezers, like, just let me get that
Yeah.
one.
It's like not that much of an exaggeration. We probably weren't running, but she would, I don't know, follow me around with tweezers in her hand.
What's your current relationship with your eyebrows?
I'm like, don't look at them. Uh, I would like to say that I've been very on top of keeping them neatly groomed because of my mom, but the truth is that I'm the same way that I always was, and she would probably be very annoyed with how they look now. Although I do think that like the cultural norm has changed. I mean, my time spent with my mom was primarily in the 90s and early 2000s, and that's when the really thin eyebrows were in, and now there's a little more variety in what's acceptable.
Yeah,
Like,
it was a rough decade for eyebrows back
yeah,
then. A rough decade.
yeah. I think there's a world in which my mom could have tweezed mine so much that they didn't grow back, and I'm grateful that that's not how it went down.
You were successful in thwarting her
Yeah.
her mission a little bit.
Uh-huh.
How about your dad? What's something that was irritating or annoying about him?
Oh God. Our relationship was so much more complicated than my relationship with my mom. We just were so different. He like he didn't really understand my anxiety. I can't fault him so much for that. I mean, it's just like so outside of his experience. But he used to say like, why don't you just call blah blah blah? And like I had such a massive fear of talking on the phone. Like I would have to psych myself up for like days before I had to make a phone call. And sometimes I'd have a question about homework or something, and he'd be like, you should just call blah blah blah. And I'd have to be like, you don't understand. It's not like that for me. I mean, he meant so well, but he was a little bull in a china shop. It was like very, very positive intentions, but he was a little intense.
It's hard for dogs to get cats,
Yeah,
right?
exactly.
I'm just picturing like a big Labrador wanting to play and a cat being like, get
They're
away from me.
hiding under the couch.
Yeah. Your dad was diagnosed with cancer the first time pretty soon after your mom died,
Mhm.
right? And then you sort of like lived with that knowledge for another 10, 15 years. Speaking of anxiety, like what was it like to live with that?
I mean, it was awful. Like, so the first time he got cancer, I was still in college. He had prostate cancer and he was able to have surgery and it like removed the whole thing. So that was a relatively quick turnaround, but there was still a moment there where it was like my mom just died and now my dad has cancer. And I remember starting a new class in college, and it was one of those smaller classes where we're sitting around a conference table, and the teacher had us go around and say like three facts about ourselves. And mine were like, I like to draw, like I'm left-handed, and my mom just died, and now my dad has cancer. And it, the other kids in the class knew me already because we were like in a cohort that moved along. So they weren't like shocked, but the teacher was like, oh my God. But it just felt, it was like too hard to not let it out in that kind of environment. Like it felt kind of like keeping a secret otherwise. And then the second time my dad got cancer was a few years later, and he had to have chemo, and it was like the whole thing, like my mom just not as intense, and he went into remission. But I was anxious about cancer the whole time. after that. I mean, I hear the word cancer and my heart starts pounding still. Before my mom got sick, I remember as a kid, I thought that cancer was like an illness that little kids get that makes them bald, but I didn't I didn't know that it was deadly. I remember just seeing those little like things that you put quarters into that would be sitting like at the checkout area of the deli or something. You'd like, I never, I mean, you can't raise money with quarters anymore, I guess. But that was like my entire understanding of cancer. And now it's just this like tidal wave whenever I think about it.
How do you sit with that in relation to your own health or your sister's health?
It is really hard. I have to actively stop myself from getting too obsessive. There's so many times when I thought I had a lump in my breast and it was a pimple. Like it's just, there's some line between taking care of your own health and not like going off the deep end of panic. And I think I'm always trying to figure out what that line is.
It's hard to have any solid ground around that because people are like, oh, it's probably fine. It's probably going to work out. You're like, yeah, but I've got two instances where it wasn't fine and it didn't work out. So that lands a little flat for me.
Yeah, it feels like if someone told me like there's a 99% chance it'll be okay, I'll be like, okay, so that leaves 1% that it's not going to be okay.
And that's probably my percent, the
Yeah,
1%.
yeah. It's like there's there's no way of calming me down when my brain is set on worrying about something.
Tyler, you mentioned that it was a very different experience with your dad's end of life than your mom's because your dad was more open to maybe talking about how things were going to be. Your family as a unit maybe talked more. What things did you intentionally do differently?
Um, I think just like the awareness that this is time that I have with a person that's not going to be here. It felt sort of like those movies where someone gets a do-over or they like go back in time. So it was a lot of thinking like if I were back in like September of 2008 and I knew that my mom was going to die the next March, how would I do things? So my sisters and I spent so much time with our dad. I like cooked and baked all his favorite foods for him, and we laughed so much and we wrote things down, and we were just like, this is this time that we have. And then even like at the very end, we were able to ask him, like, is there anything you want at your funeral or Shiva? Which is like a mind-blowing thing to think about. Um, so like Shivas are usually 7 days, and Shiva means seven in Hebrew. But my dad said you can just have 3 days, which is also a thing people sometimes do. It's not like unheard of. So that's what we did. It was very appreciated. The Shiva was so exhausting that it was nice to not have to keep going for more days. The knowledge that he had some part in planning what we were doing was very comforting. It was like he's still part of it somehow.
Like in a way, he was still being a dad and taking care of you and helping in that way.
Mm-hmm.
It seems too like it can take away a little like, what should we do? And is this what he would want? Is this what he would want? To have just even like a little thread of like, oh no, here's a grounding point we can go back to. He said this.
Definitely. It's so nice to have that kind of certainty. There's so much space normally to be like, what would the person have wanted? To just know like this is what he wanted. That's really a gift.
A part in your book that I found myself sort of laughing out loud about, but also really appreciating was your reaction as a 19-year-old of like, I want everything my mom ever touched. Like coins, scraps of paper, I'm keeping all of it. You guys can't take any of this stuff away from me. And now I have this image of you like having created a mom museum somewhere. So, one, like, what happened to all of your mom's stuff? And two, has your reaction been similar or different to your dad's belongings?
Yeah, I still have a lot of her stuff. It's it's not like it's all in one place like a shrine, but it really is scattered throughout my apartment. I'm sure there's stuff behind me. That big painting that is on my little fireplace thing, my parents bought on their honeymoon. So that's kind of a both parents thing. Um, but there are just like knickknacks and tchotchkes all around my apartment that were my mom's. Um, and I love that. I just love like being surrounded by it. I have, it's not the actual perfume that she used because that would probably be like rancid by now, but I bought the same perfume that she had and I spray it on myself sometimes. And scent is such a cool thing, how if you close your eyes, it feels like the person is right there. And I have a lot of stuff of my dad's too. It was a little bit different because uh, throughout the years, he just gave me a bunch of stuff. Because like we lived in a house growing up, and then we ended up living in the city. My dad remarried and moved into his wife's apartment. It was like a two-bedroom apartment, so she's not going to want just like tons and tons of family memories. Um, so I took a lot of things when they moved, and then throughout the years, my dad was always trying to like clean out a drawer or something. His wife wanted him to do that. He was not always a big fan, but I think it was comforting to him to be like, oh, one of the girls has it. And he also, over the last few years, got really, really into drawing. He had always been like a creative guy, and he would doodle a lot on phone calls, and it was fun to watch him doodle. But after he retired, he just I would joke that like I'm a professional artist and my dad made like 10 times as much art as I was. So like there's this big stack on top of these bookshelves of just all these drawings of his that I'm sure I'll do something with my sisters and ink some up. I thought it would be cool to try to like digitize some and maybe see if I could sell prints or give prints away.
Mm.
I think it would be cool to like spread his art around. Um, but yeah, having tangible stuff just that like scratches an itch for me with grief.
So it seems like maybe a little different process of how you came to have all of this memorabilia, but a similar draw to having the memorabilia.
Yeah.
Two-part question for you. On the hardest days with grief, what do you turn to? And the second part of that question, do you find any rhyme or reason to your hard days, or are they more just like a random occurrence?
I think they're mostly random. I think earlier on, the big like holidays and anniversaries and things would really stir things up. And that doesn't never happen now, but there have been plenty of death anniversaries where I felt totally normal. And then just like random days where like the wind hits me wrong and I'm weeping. So yeah, it really is all over the place, which I think is kind of nice. It's woven throughout my life. It's not just held to these particular days.
Mm.
On days where the grief is really bad, I think like the biggest thing in my family is that I talk to my sisters. I'm really lucky that I'm super close with my sisters. We were always close, but I think after my mom died, we got closer, and after my dad died, we got even closer. So we're just like this tight-knit threesome, and that is very helpful. I joke that like all my comfort hobbies are just things that like an elderly woman would do. I love to crochet. I love jigsaw puzzles. Just these like meditative, like tactile, puzzly kind of things. They calm me down. They give me something to focus on.
In a weird way, too, as a co old lady puzzler, there's this idea for me of like putting something together that helps when everything feels like it's blasted apart and falling apart.
Oh, yeah.
You know, it's like, oh, I can, here's one thing I can like put together.
Uh-huh. I think it's similar with crochet because it's just like this pile of yarn and then it turns into a thing. Yeah, taking disorder and putting it into some small amount of order is very comforting. I'm like, I love sorting things by color. Every time I eat M&Ms, I sort them by color. Uh, and at one point, I bought this thing of beads from Michael's Crafts, not to make anything with them, but just to sort them. And I took like a muffin tin and I sorted them by color, and it was great. I had the best time. And then I dumped them all back in afterwards.
Well, that makes me wonder, was your mom an order maker or a disorder maker?
Oh, my mom was like, order, 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 and my dad was disorder, disorder. And I got both because
Mm.
my dad, like, I feel like 99.9% sure he had ADHD, but he was never officially diagnosed. But I was diagnosed in my 30s. But I also am a perfectionist like my mom. So
Mm.
that's not great. It's like I'm following myself around, giving myself orders all the
Yeah.
time, having a hard
You're like,
time following them.
if only I can perfect this chaos, that's
Yeah.
really when I'm going to have arrived.
Uh-huh.
Well, now I have another sideways question for you, which is, was there anything about receiving your like official diagnosis for ADD that helped you understand your grief differently?
I mean, maybe like the way that I reacted to it a little bit. Uh, the the whole thing of hyper focus with ADHD, where it's like you're focusing so hard on something that you like forget to eat and forget to go to the bathroom. And it's not always that intense, but that's how I have been with like phases of different hobbies. So when I first learned to crochet, I would just wake up and crochet all day long and then go to bed and my hands were cramping and uh or like I got very into Animal Crossing for a while where I was just like so obsessed with it and making mood boards on Pinterest to decorate my village and it always felt like this sort of annoying quirk that I have. But now I'm like, oh, that's just a thing. That's just how my brain works. It's okay.
Does it feel like there were elements of your grief that became like a hyper focus, if that's the right language to use for that?
I don't know if that's exactly how it worked for me, but I'm probably the better girl who spent the most time wallowing out of the three of us. And that like may have had an impact. I'm not positive.
So I'm guessing this is a question that many people ask you. So if you're like, I pass, I don't want to answer, that's totally fine. But just wondering, you know, you created Dancing at the Pity Party, your graphic memoir about your mom's experience with cancer and her death and your grief. And now you're in this new place of your dad having died. Is there some project on the horizon around that?
There's nothing in any amount of official capacity, but I think that, I mean, like when my dad first got re-diagnosed, immediately my reaction was like, oh, Dancing at the Pity Party too. And I asked him if it was okay if I ever made a book about him, which was an interesting thing to have the opportunity to do because when I was working on Dancing at the Pity Party, I spent a lot of time like fretting over if my mom would approve of me. It's not exactly airing her dirty laundry, but like presenting this private thing to the world. Um, And so with my dad, I could literally be like, is it okay if I ever make something about you? And he said, as long as I don't say mean stuff about him. Okay. Uh, I mean, like making art and comics is so helpful for me in processing like every kind of emotion. So I wouldn't be shocked if at some point one day this becomes something.
Well, for listeners who want to tag along for the maybe ride, but also just want to stay connected to the other work that you do and the things that you put out in the world, what are some places people can find you?
My big one is Instagram. I'm at Tyler Feder, Feder. I used to use Twitter, but not really anymore. That's like my main spot. I also have a tylerfeder.com that I have not updated in a super long time. So if you want to get some outdated info about me, you can go there.
Well, it's sometimes nice to see different iterations of guests over the years. So I'll link to both of those in the show notes so listeners can find you, both current and past versions of you. Yeah, but Tyler, thank you for coming on Grief Out Loud, for having this conversation with me, for sharing so openly about your mom and your dad and your grief and just all the processing that you've done along the way. Just really grateful for your time in this conversation.
Thank you so much for having me. I love talking about this stuff, so this is a real treat.
Well, listeners, thank you for being part of our community, for making the show mean something, for giving guests and myself a chance to have conversations and know that they're making a difference in the world. If there's a particular conversation you connect with and you want to share it with someone, we love when you forward episodes to people in your community. And I also really love to hear from you. So if you want to connect with me, you can email me at griefoutloud@dougy.org. That's DOUGY.org. That's the main website for Dougy Center, where you can find all of our free downloadable resources. That includes tip sheets, activity sheets, workbooks, as well as each and every episode of Grief Out Loud. I'm always excited to share that the podcast is sponsored in part by the Chester Stephan Endowment Fund. Grief Out Loud is a production of Dougy Center, the National Grief Center for Children and Families in Portland, Oregon. Thanks so much for listening. We hope you'll join us again next time.